Alright, so this is Fantasy Insight 101 with Rob, and today I'm going to be talking about quarterbacks. Some of the top quarterbacks in the NFL for your fantasy league, as well as a couple sleepers here and there. I want to reiterate, however, that I am not talented Mr. Roto. However, my insight is quite compelling. So let's get started. The top fantasy quarterback in all leagues this year should be Aaron Rodgers. There's an argument to be made that Rodgers should be the first quarterback off the boards in drafts this fall. He led his position in fantasy scoring in 2009, and frankly, it wasn't even close. Over the last two seasons, he scored a combined 602 fantasy points on NFL.com. When Rodgers took over for Brett Favre in 2008, he threw for over 4,000 passing yards and threw for one or more touchdowns in 14 of the Packers' 16 games. In 2009, he had 5 300-plus yard games and 10 games with 2 or more touchdowns, and 7 games where he ran for over 20 yards. In 2009, Rodgers threw for 4,434 passing yards, had 30 touchdowns, 316 rushing yards, along with 5 rushing touchdowns. Rodgers threw for 1 or more touchdowns in 15 of the Packers' 16 games. With emerging tight end Jermichael Finley, along with Greg Jennings and Donald Driver at wide receiver, there is no question that Rodgers should continue to be a fantasy stud at quarterback. He is easily a top-end number 1 fantasy quarterback, worth a pick between the end of round 1 and the end of round 2, depending on how quarterbacks are scored in your league. Rodgers may not be the best quarterback in the NFL, but he very well could be the best fantasy signal caller in 2010. The second quarterback to be taken off fantasy draft boards should be Drew Brees. Drew Brees could arguably be the number 1 quarterback over Aaron Rodgers, Peyton Manning, and Tom Brady. He is one of the hardest working players in the league and will do everything in his power to get the Saints primed for another Super Bowl run. He should continue to be a slam dunk for fantasy owners in 2010. The Super Bowl 44 MVP put up huge numbers for the third straight season in New Orleans, completing an incredible 70.6% of his regular season passes for 4,388 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 11 interceptions. Brees passed for 290-plus yards 10 times in 2009 with 363 completions and threw for 2 or more touchdowns in 9 of his 15 games. Over the last 4 seasons, there hasn't been a more consistent or reliable fantasy quarterback than Brees. In that span, he's averaged an impressive 268 fantasy points per year on NFL.com, and he hasn't finished any worse than 4th in points at his position. With top receivers Marcus Colston and Robert Meekum, including a dangerous backfield to Reggie Bush and Pierre Thomas, the Saints' offense is a perfect fit for the talented Brees, who will continue to light up scoreboards in 2010. He is well worth a first-round pick in all fantasy drafts. The third quarterback to be taken off fantasy boards should be Peyton Manning. When can you get baseline consistency of a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback and then occasionally get a production spike that reaches into the 4,500 yard range? Why wouldn't you want Peyton Manning on your fantasy team? In 2009, he set a career high in completions while producing his best single season completion rate and the second most passing yards of his career. Manning is a top 3 quarterback and posted his 4th consecutive 4,000 yard passing season and tossed 30 or more touchdown passes for the 3rd time in the last 4 seasons. He threw for 49 touchdowns in the 2004-2005 season to give you a glimpse. He also finished 5th in fantasy points among all players on NFL.com in 2009. In the 2009 season, he threw for 4,500 yards and 33 touchdowns with 393 completions. He had 7 games where he threw for 3 or more touchdowns and threw for a touchdown in 13 of the Colts' 16 games. He's in line for another big season with the best tight end in the league, Dallas Clark, and one of the top receivers in the league, Reggie Wayne. Austin Collie, Pierre Garcon, and Anthony Gonzalez should also help fill in the slots and get Peyton another outstanding year at quarterback. The next quarterback to be taken off the board should be Tom Brady. What can you say? He's made 4 Super Bowl appearances and is a 3-time Super Bowl champion. Yes, he tore his ACL in 2008 and was out for the season, and yes, he's getting older, but if you want a more reliable and consistent quarterback in the league, you should draft Brady. In 2009, he threw for over 300 or more yards, as well as throwing for 2 or more touchdowns in 7 of the Patriots' 16 games. He had 371 completions, only 3rd to Peyton Manning and Matt Schaub, and with a full season under his belt since his injury in 2008, Brady could even be better in 2010. With Randy Moss returning and Wes Welker coming back from injury, Brady should have elite receivers to throw to. With new tight end Rob Gronkowski, who was drafted in the 2nd round from Arizona by the Patriots, who is filling in for Ben Watson, who was recently traded to the Browns, this should be another dangerous target for Brady to throw to. Brady is healthy and is in the last year of his contract, so he should be in for another big season. He should produce excellent totals in an offense that will continue to lean on him. Look for him to come off the board between the 2nd and 4th rounds in most leagues. Expect Brady to once again throw for over 4,000 yards and pass for nearly 30 touchdowns or more. The next quarterback to be taken off draft boards should be Philip Rivers. Rivers has emerged as one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football. He's coming off a season in which he posted a career-best 4,254 passing yards, and his 29 total touchdowns marked his second highest total ever. With the Chargers' offense becoming increasingly pass-heavy, Rivers' level of statistical success should remain high for his fantasy owners. Philip Rivers is a top 5 quarterback, and in his last 2 seasons, he's thrown for over 8,200 yards and over 70 touchdowns. In 2009, Rivers had at least 1 touchdown passing or rushing in every game played. He averaged a league-best 8.8 yards per attempt and scored the most fantasy points of any quarterback who had fewer than 347 passing attempts, as his deep downfield connection with Vincent Jackson blossomed. Both Jackson and Chris Chambers should be one of the top receiver duos in the NFL, and Rivers will certainly benefit from this. In 2009, he threw for 2 or more touchdowns in 9 of the Chargers' 16 games with 317 completions. Look for him to post another season with better than 4,000 passing yards and about 30 total touchdowns. He'll come off the board between rounds 2 and 4. The next quarterback off the board should be Matt Schaub. Fantasy owners who had waited for Schaub to break out were rewarded last season. He posted career bests across the board, passing for nearly 4,800 yards, throwing for 29 touchdowns, and had 396 completions. He led the NFL in 3 categories: passing yards, completions, and attempts, and his connection with Andre Johnson may now be the league's premier deep aerial threat. Matt is easily a top 10 quarterback, if not a top 5. I would take him in front of Tony Romo, but behind Philip Rivers. Schaub benefited from the deterioration of the team's running game, aka Sleep Slayton, which put a greater emphasis on the pass and allowed him to throw for 300 or more yards 9 times. He also passed for 2 or more touchdowns 10 times in the Texans' 16 games. With essentially the same cast of players returning for the 2010 season, there is little reason to believe Schaub's numbers won't be just as good this year. If he can stay healthy, he's obviously a top starting fantasy quarterback. With a superstar receiver in Andre Johnson and a reliable tight end in Owen Daniels, Schaub should remain a number 1 fantasy quarterback. Again, the only question fantasy owners need to ask here is how many games will Matt play? In 2007 and 2008, Schaub played in just 11 games in each season. The next quarterback to be taken off the board should be Tony Romo. Many people argue that Romo should be taken ahead of Philip Rivers. Romo has top sleeper potential this year as a quarterback, but it is all up to him and his work ethic. Romo has the potential to sling the ball all over the field, and in 2009, he finished 3rd in the NFL in passing yards, while ending up as just one of 4 full-time quarterbacks to notch single-digit interceptions. Also, having fumbled 10 and 12 times in 2007 and 2008, he dropped it just 5 times in 2009. Heck, look at his stats. In 3 of his last 4 seasons, Romo threw for 25 or more touchdowns and rushed for over 100 yards. In 2009, he had 8 games where he threw for over 300 yards and 2 or more touchdowns. Except for their respective running numbers, Romo compared favorably with Aaron Rodgers last season. Losing Flozell Adams at left tackle adds some downside into his equation, but with Miles Austin emerging as a clear number 1 receiver, Jason Witten returning as one of the top tight ends in the league, and Dez Bryant on hand as a possible huge playmaker right away, Romo is absolutely a fantasy starter heading into 2010. Expect Romo to throw for 4,300 yards and 25 touchdowns in the 2010 season. Alright, the sleeper quarterback of the draft should be Kevin Kolb of the Eagles. Kolb will be one of the hottest sleepers in fantasy drafts this season. He is the new number 1 quarterback in Philadelphia after the trade of Donovan McNabb and leads a pass-heavy offense loaded with several weapons. He showed flashes of potential in 2 starts last season, throwing for 718 yards and 4 touchdowns while completing 65 passes out of 85 attempts. An accurate and athletic passer, Kolb is in a great position to find success and could develop into a regular starter in fantasy leagues. His passing accuracy makes him a nice fit for Andy Reid's system, and certainly we've seen first-year starters in the NFL have big success the past couple seasons, like Matt Ryan and Joe Flacco. But this is still a West Coast offense that won't take an inordinate number of shots down the field, and Kolb is still improving, with Michael Vick lingering. I'd feel safer taking Kolb as a high upside number 2. He has great weapons with top receiver Deshaun Jackson alongside Jeremy Maclin with emerging tight end Brent Selleck. What I like best is that Kolb is under center for one of the most prolific passing offenses in football, and that's not going to change with McNabb gone.